Okay, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our community updates. So today we wanted to give you a brief update on what has been going on in the past few weeks and months in Kedro. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the new features that we have and some interesting developments that we've done. And we're also going to talk a little bit about Kedro-Viz. And next, we're going to cover what has been going on the Databricks space and how Kedro can play along with Databricks. And we're going to close with some community updates from our DevRel side. So my name is Juan Luis. I'm developer advocate at the Kedro team. And I'm going to give way to Meryl, who is going to tell us a little bit about Kedro and the latest releases and the OmegaConf config loader. So Meryl, or yours.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. And hello, everyone. I'm Meryl. I'm the tech lead for Kedro Framework. And I will be talking a bit about some of the main new features in the 18 series. Starting with our new config loader, the OmegaConfigLoader. So what have we introduced exactly? It's a new class to load your configuration powered by OmegaConf. For those of you who don't know OmegaConf, it's a third-party library that's basically all about configuration. So it's YAML-based hierarchical configuration system. It's also used by Hydra, which is a library by Facebook or Meta, however you want to call them nowadays. And the main part it now plays within Kedro or within this new config loader is it's a replacement for the AnyConf library that we are using at the back for our legacy config loader and templated config loader. AnyConf is a much less popular library than OmegaConf, and that's why we wanted to kind of move forward and choose a more used and more supported library in the back of Kedro. And we also chose OmegaConf because it enables us to introduce features for our users that people have been asking for a very long time. So the most requested feature with regards to configuration was support to read credentials from environment variables, which has now been enabled with this new OmegaConf loader. It also allows to, leverage some of the features that OmegaConf has. It is a very extensive library when it comes to also merging configuration and doing quite clever things. So for us, it was a great way to introduce these features without having to build them by ourselves. So one of these things is what they call resolvers. It's a way to, I would say, interpolate values inside of your configuration. They have a bunch of default ways to do that, but you can also write your own custom resolver. So it's a very powerful way of making your configuration more adjustable and customizable. And within Kedro, it basically allowed us to leverage this existing library and give users a lot of new features there. So how do you actually use this? The OmegaConfigLoader is in a lot of ways exactly the same as the other config loaders, and that means in the base of the class. So we've kept it exactly in the same structure, and we kept it also similar to our templated config loader and config loader in the way that you activate it or select to use it. So that's within your settings.py. You can just import this OmegaConf loader from the Kedro config library part and then set it as your config loader class. I also wanted to show you how to use specific OmegaConfigLoader features. So the first being how to actually load your credentials from environment variables. So for this one, you will use pure OmegaConf syntax, and they have this thing called oc.env, so OmegaConf.env, which is a resolver specifically for environment variables. So what that could look like inside of a Kedro credentials file is basically you would have a definition for, well, in this example, S3, and you want to provide your AWS access key and secret access key. You could do that by adding in the syntax. So the $sign and the curly brace are basically your placeholder, your template placeholder. And inside you specify where to get the value from. So you use oc.env, indicating it's an environment variable, and then your AWS access key or secret key or whatever you've called it on your environment. I also wanted to showcase how you can do variable interpolation for parameters. So at the moment for OmegaConfigLoader, it will load all your configuration types, so your parameters, your catalog, credentials, and logging. But variable interpolation for the time being is only there for parameters. The way you use it again is a very similar syntax to the environment variables. You use the $sign and then the curly braces, and then you specify where your value needs to be coming from. So in this case, you'll have your data.size in another parameters file to fill it out. It's a very short example, so I would definitely encourage you to go and try more difficult cases yourself as well. Why did we introduce this new OmegaConfigLoader? So some of you might be aware that we did extensive user research into configuration with Kedro over the summer last year, but we actually did pre-research before that as well in 2021, if I remember correctly. And we, from both of these pieces, we really found that users do struggle with configuring Kedro projects easily. They especially bump into the issue where their configuration files get really, really large. And of course, this comes into play when you have very large projects, so a lot of pipelines, and you need more configuration. Another thing that users have struggled with is that configuration is treated in the same way in Kedro. So when you have your config and when it's loaded inside of Kedro, Kedro doesn't really care what it is. Parameters, credentials, catalog, logging, they're all merged and treated in the same way. But potentially this isn't the right thing. And a new config loader is an option to get away from that or introduce new features. Another pain point with the older config loader and template config loader is that they are very hard to customize for our users. So we do have an abstract config loader class, but it basically doesn't give you the right setup. This is definitely a design flaw on our side. And we want to change that by giving you a config loader that is suitable and you can actually customize as well. Because of course, we can add features, but there will always be features that are more niche, and we do want to allow you to do that. And from a developer perspective, so for us on the team, configuration was also a very painful part to be working on. And that's mainly because configuration loading in Kedro has evolved over time. So some of the features that exist, and specifically the templated config loader, it was a contribution from outside the team and kind of grow by just user need, but it was never really designed on purpose and never designed in a sustainable way either. It's also an incredibly complex part of the code base to work on. So when requests came in for new features like credentials through environment variables, we simply couldn't enable it in a good way. And that's why maybe you have to wait for some of these features for a long time. Well, and so what's next? Actually, we have already been continuing the improvements for the OmegaConfigLoader since it was released. So one of the latest features in 18.7 is that you can also read configuration from compressed files. So not only from just a regular directory structure, you can also now point it to compressed zip or tar files. Next things that are coming or are currently being discussed is variable interpolation for catalog files. So essentially what you can do with parameters now, we want to find a way to allow you to do that for catalog as well. We want to explore more suitable merging strategies per configuration type. Some of the advanced users might know that the catalog, parameters, credentials, and logging are all merged in a hard merge. That basically means if you have overlapping keys, it will just override. But we've heard, especially for parameters, this is not a desirable functionality. So we will be looking at what merging strategy makes sense for which configuration type. And then our ultimate goal, and my ultimate goal firstly, is for 0.19 actually to have OmegaConfigLoader to be the default. So not the config-loader, legacy config-loader anymore, but this OmegaConfigLoader. But that does mean we need your feedback. We need to know what you think about the OmegaConfigLoader as it is today. Is this a good default for you? What are things that are working well? What are things that maybe aren't working? And how can we support your user needs? One caveat I must say is that this OmegaConfigLoader is not a one-on-one replacement for the existing config loaders that we have. And this is on purpose because we want to give you something better than we have today. So you might also find that some features will take a bit longer with this OmegaConfigLoader. We're really trying to do it in the best way. If we can ship things in an experimental manner, we might, but we're still discussing how that would work because we generally don't want to ship breaking changes too often. So we want to be quite safe for that. So let us know what you think. And then a quick note on other things that we've done, because configuration hasn't been the only thing we focused on. Although actually the first point on here is also about configuration, but we've added functionality where you can now specify where your configuration is stored when you do a Kedro run. So previously, when you did Kedro run, we would always assume your configuration lives inside a conf folder. You were able to change this in settings, but as some of you already might know, is that when you package up a Kedro project, you wouldn't be able to change where your config is read from, and now you can, because we added conf source to the Kedro run CLI. We also added support for generator functions as nodes. So this means that you can now also have nodes that use yield instead of a return. We added a new Kedro Jupyter setup CLI command, which is a very quick way to set up a Jupyter kernel for Kedro. There's been improvements to the Kedro CLI to make it more consistent. Maybe not something you'll notice straight away, but by 0.19, we really aim to make the CLI cleaner and much more easy to use. Then, of course, with all releases, there have been several bug fixes. And then I finally wanted to do a shout out to Joe and Juan, who are also both on the call, who've done really massive improvements to documentation. I know as users, you might not always notice this, but it's been really, really great work. And we do hope that you find our docs improve over time. Yeah, and with that, I think I've filled my time, and I'm going to hand over to Nero.
Thanks, Meryl, and that was a wonderful presentation. And I'll try and meet that quality. Hello, everyone, and glad to be here. My name is Nero Okwer, and today I'll be talking about the amazing work the Kedro-Viz team has done on the latest release, with specific emphasis on the experiment tracking work. And I'll just share my screen.
We see it perfectly.
Okay, great. Okay, so just a quick definition. Kedro-Viz is the interactive visualization tool that enables users to see how the data flows in the data science pipeline, so the flowchart view, and also perform experiment tracking side by side. Now, what's new with our latest release, and I would highlight what's new, and I'll also go through a little demo of what the different features. So what's new is preview data sets in the metadata panel. So we've added on the right side of your pipeline flowchart view, the ability to click on a data set within your flowchart and preview that data set to see the different rows. Secondly, building off the work stream of experiment tracking, we've added time series and parallel coordinates plots. And finally, we've added plots and JSON dataset names in experiment tracking and linking that with your pipeline flowchart. Now, what that means is in your experiment tracking view, you can select a dataset name and it will take you to where that is on your pipeline flowchart. And this is just a demo of all the features. This is the panel that's been added on your right. It shows what's new. Also, if you select the data set, this is where you can preview the data set. And when you click it, it shows the data set. And afterwards, you click back, and it'll take you back to the page. And then if you go and you click the experiment tracking, you can compare up to 3 runs in the metrics tab. This shows the difference with the delta. So in the time series, you can compare the different metrics in time series and parallel coordinates. And then it is here that if you select a data set name, like so, it will take to that data set in the pipeline flowchart. Okay. Now, why Kedro experiment tracking, or why did Kedro do experiment tracking? So a lot of this work is based on extensive user research and user testing we did last year, which showed the things that Kedro users like about Kedro and the value we believe we could add with Kedro experiment tracking. So for example, we've incorporated experiment tracking into Kedro-Viz because the real benefit is you can do that with no additional infrastructure. You can quickly select, plot, and compare multiple metric changes towards the goal of identifying the best performing ML experiment. And it's natively embedded with your existing Kedro workflow. So this is very valuable for existing Kedro users. Now, despite having this solution, we understand that users might have other solutions they're using, such as MLflow. So this Kedro gives you the opportunity to work side by side with these other tools by leveraging the different community and vendor developed plugins, such as Kedro MLflow, Kedro Neptunes, Kedro AM. Now, if, for example, you want to, so in Kedro MLflow, if you want extended experiment tracking, model servicing, model servicing tools, you can use MLflow. If you want extensive model registry, experiment tracking, and also extensive visualization, you can use the Kedro Neptunes plugin. And that's the real benefit of Kedro and Kedro-Viz and experiment tracking is you can leverage Kedro while still using these other tools. Now, to get started with Kedro experiment tracking, you simply need to go here and click. Now, coming specifically to the highlighted experiment tracking feature, which is the parallel coordinates and time series. Now, previously, it was difficult for data scientists to map their parameters to their model performance to keep track of which parameter has given the particular output. We've tried to simplify this for the user by making it easy for them to plot the experiment metrics of their pipeline runs in both time series or parallel coordinates. And this is just a demo specifically for this feature. In summary, users can preview their data sets in the metadata panel, which also shows what's new. The benefit of Kedro experiment tracking is you don't require additional infrastructure, and Kedro-Viz gives you the opportunity to quickly do experiment tracking side by side with pipeline visualization. So on one hand, you can be doing experiment tracking, and then you can investigate where that data set comes from, especially when presenting to stakeholders. Specifically in experiment tracking, you can plot your experiment metrics in time series and parallel coordinates. You also have the option to leverage community and vendor developed plugins such as Kedro MLflow, Kedro Neptunes, and Kedro AIM. And now, like I mentioned earlier, the plots, it's linked, the dataset names are linked in the pipeline flowchart. You can quickly go and get started testing these features at demo.kedro.org, and you can use this barcode to join our Slack and our documentation for that. And then finally, with regards to what's new, the next thing we're working on, focused on for the Kedro-Viz team is collaborative experiment tracking and enhanced navigation. The first one is shareable URLs, which is the idea is to help you to be able to share your Kedro-Viz pipeline visualization with other people. And secondly is collaborative experiment tracking, just a way to help you and your team collaborate on an experiment, as opposed to you having to run your experiments just on one, being limited to one local machine. And then finally, we're taking the side panel further, the impact of that using visual tips, where we'll have different cards that show different features, different new features to help each time you go to Kedro-Viz, you're abreast with the latest features. and ignore the concept prototype. But yeah, that is it. And we'll take questions now.
Thank you very much, Nero, for the demo. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. Remember to post any questions that you might have in the meantime in the chat, and we can address them during the call. And now I'm going to pass the torch to Yetunde and Yannick. They're going to update us about how to use Kedro on Databricks and all the research that has gone into improving that. So Yetunde, all yours.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I am product director on Kedro. Been on the project for close to 5 years now. I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we're doing with Databricks, actually working with the Databricks team to try and make it so that you have an awesome time running Kedro on Databricks. So let's talk about first the why. So we did some research last year and really tried to unpack who were the dominant machine learning platforms used by our Kedro users in order to best prioritize which ones do we deal with first. And overwhelmingly across our open source user base, Databricks was the most significantly adopted one, with 43% of our users actually leveraging it in some capacity. The research was done by us interviewing 16 different people. So thank you if you're part of the study. Doing different polls, which had 140 participants, and then also surveying people, 46 different participants in our different surveys. What we really wanted to understand was 3 categories of things. The first one was we wanted to understand, if you've ever had issues trying to use Kedro on Databricks and sometimes have chosen not to, what were some of those things that were driving that? We also wanted to unpack if some of these things were Kedro issues or if it was a Databricks issue, and specifically IDE support on Databricks, which is still evolving. We wanted to understand what was going on there. And then obviously all of these things would create an opportunity space that we as a Kedro team could work with and collaborate with the Databricks team to deliver on these things. So in terms of the adoption barriers that we found, some of them are actually because of IDE support linked to Databricks. Kedro is best used obviously within an IDE. And if you're dealing with a notebook-driven platform, which has evolving standards on how they support IDEs, then sometimes this becomes a bit challenging. So some of our users found here that some of the reasons why they chose not to use Kedro there is because there are quite a few workflow steps if you were going to be using an IDE within Databricks. Databricks' support for IDEs is obviously evolving. Databricks Connect, which is a very popular tool that people use to purely just interact with their IDE and then push their changes to the Databricks workspace, is being sunset. There's obviously things like Databricks repos, which is supposed to be helping with the Git workflow, and DBX. We'll be talking about all these tools as well as they think through how to develop IDE support. And now there's a VS Code extension as well. So there's quite a few things. Some people just prefer notebooks, and that's also okay. If you're purely working out of a notebook, Kedro does have IPython support for notebooks. The workflow is quite easy, but you're not leveraging the full extent of Kedro. And then some people thought that Databricks and Kedro were competing tools, which is not quite right. We're not a data and ML infrastructure tool. So in terms of some of the things that we wanted to understand from our users was, what exactly were you doing when you were using Kedro and Databricks together? So with this, I'm only going to go into 2 user journeys and some of the data around that, which describe what people were doing when they were using Kedro and IDE and Databricks together. There's obviously a larger GitHub issue, which actually has summaries for all of these different workflows as well, if you wanted to find out what different people were doing that we impact in the studies. So the first journey is how do I make sure that I have the latest version of my code base in the Databricks workspace? So it assumes I'm making changes in my IDE and then pushing those changes somehow to the Databricks workspace so I can run my code. So with this one, the most common workflow was using some sort of Git-based workflow. So if you picture this, you would make your changes in your IDE, hop over to the terminal, which is also in your IDE, do your Git commit, and push your changes to the Databricks workspace on a branch. pull the changes in the branch on your Databricks workspace, and then you'd be good to go. There's an evolving pattern of people using Databricks repos to do that. So if you haven't checked it out, recommend checking it out because it does support this workflow. But obviously we did see some people using Python in a notebook to try and pull the changes back into the Databricks workspace. That also happened too. But if I try to break down the different user interfaces that you touch your IDE, the place, your code editor, you touch that part of the IDE. You touch your terminal, that's 2. You open up a browser, that's 3. Go to the Databricks workspace, that's 4, and or 6. Then you're pulling in the changes on the Databricks repos thing because you have to click some down, drop down to pull the changes in. There's like 6 steps to pull changes into your Databricks workspace, which is quite a lot. So 30% of our users felt like this had a lot of steps. Another emerging workflow was the use of DBX. DBX is a Databricks experimental tool built on top of the Databricks CLI. There is this one really cool command called DBX sync, which is it kind of like watches for changes in your IDE and then immediately sends those things directly into your Databricks workspace, which is pretty cool to use. But most people did not know about DBX. So, I mean, you can check out the project and see if it's best for you. In terms of journey 2, which is how do I run my Kedro pipelines using a Databricks cluster? So in terms of ordering, this assumes that you've already set up, you already have the latest version of your code and you want to run it to see how things are going here. The most popular method that people had was using a Databricks notebook. So what they would do is they would open up the Databricks notebook, they would initiate a session, run their Kedro pipelines from there. Because in this sense, you use a Databricks notebook as an entry point where you're running your pipeline through there. This user journey was interesting for us to observe. It's the most common one by far, but a lot of people didn't know that we have an IPython extension that actually works in Databricks notebooks and would significantly reduce the amount of code that you would need to write to do your pipeline run from there. We know why. This section of our docs is like completely buried in a long Databricks documentation thing. So we are reorganizing the docs. It's a project that Yannick is part of the project that Yannick is leading right now to make this stuff easier to find because you just didn't know. The other methods that people use was packaging. So with this, what it meant is users would package their Kedro project as a Python wheel and then deploy it on the Databricks workspace and run it there. But we had some issues where Kedro we don't package configuration in that Python wheel because we just want you to be packaging your source code. And there was no way for Kedro to be pointed to the new location of your conf directory. So it was very difficult to run. And we had some weird workarounds that people were doing in order to make this workflow work, which included packaging the configuration in source. We fixed this. Right now, it's possible, I think, from version 18.4 or 5. It's possible to actually pass a conf source for a Kedro run, and you can actually pass where your configuration is stored. And equally, you can also package up your configuration as a compressed file and pass that in at runtime. And then some people are still obviously using Databricks Connect. I do recommend that you move away from this. Databricks is sunsetting support for Databricks Connect as they figure out their IDE support. So you don't necessarily want to be using something that they're going to be letting go. And obviously, there were issues with Databricks Connect in the sense that if you were a pure Spark user, you're using PySpark, you're not writing any Python or Pandas code, then Databricks Connect was actually pretty seamless for you. It was actually a great tool to use in your IDE. But as soon as you interact with Python or Pandas-based workflows as well, Databricks Connect would immediately download the data to your local computer and kick off running processes from there, which would cause a few issues depending on how big the data set was, 1. And then 2, obviously, you would obviously be extremely slowed down because you're not benefiting from your code running on the Databricks cluster in a sense. So, and it's also a bit of an InfoSec risk as well, if you think about it. You're not supposed to be removing the data from your Databricks workspace, and now it's like on your local computer. So That's why they're sunsetting it. They're aware of some of the issues with it and figuring out what does their next model look like. In terms of some of the features that, actually, let me start again. When people say integrate with Databricks and make things work, there are obviously many parts of Databricks that could be integrated with. And we did find, obviously, that there are some commonly used features by some Kedro users here. Obviously, the Databricks Notebooks one is the popular one. The 7% that were not using Databricks Notebooks were exclusively Databricks Connect users and had no need to actually ever open up Databricks Notebooks to do anything. But obviously, you'll see there's a varied range of support for different tools. And what that means is when we've informed our prioritization list for this, we obviously look to this data to determine what do we do next. So with this, we have a high priority stuff we're working on and medium priority stuff. So we're currently in stage of overhauling all of our documentation, which recommends development and deployment workflows for Databricks. And based on that, we'll actually be building out maybe a Kedro Databricks plugin or even a starter, a project template actually to get you up to speed and going with your Databricks workflow. It's mostly to actually automate the steps that the documentation would have recommended. And then we're obviously going to be publishing a host of Kedro Databricks content to show that we're compatible tools and are great together. Some of the medium priority stuff we'll look at supporting things like Delta Lake or the managed Delta table that Databricks recommends, as well as managed ML Flow on Databricks too. We have another team at our company that is helping actually contribute these as data sets. Also on that note, please do contribute data sets to Kedro data sets in particular if you want, because it helps make the project better and a lot of people can use those things. And then there's a few things that have already been addressed because we flagged them as part of this research. So a way for users to run Kedro-Viz through a Databricks notebooks. You don't have to run Kedro-Viz locally, not anymore. Just run it through the notebook using run-viz line magic. We also addressed some logging areas that appeared because Databricks repos did not allow you to write files, which is exactly what happens when you're logging things to the logging file. So now logging is optional, so that error has fallen away and will not prevent you from not being able to do a Kedro pipeline run. And then we also had to, as I mentioned, address issues for how a packaged Kedro project will find configuration so that you can do your run. So now I'll hand over to Yannick to talk us through what's been happening on the Databricks side with Kedro.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yesu. Yeah, I'll talk through some of the concrete things we've been doing to implement some of the features that Yesu has just been talking about. Let me share my PowerPoint. I'll share the last slide that we saw from Yesu. So starting with the high priority features, it's true that our users rely on our documentation a lot, and at the moment our documentation is somewhat out of date for one, and doesn't cover these really powerful tools and features that Databricks has since released that really improve developers' lives on Databricks. So currently we have a deployment to a Databricks cluster documentation page, and that encompasses both deployment during development and deployment during production. That's difficult because for production, you have different aims than in development. In development, you want a very fast iterative cycle. And at the moment, we're catering to neither. So we are splitting this documentation into two brand new suggested workflows, one for development, which uses Databricks repos and DBX, and the other for putting your Kedro project into production on Databricks, which uses DBX as a vector for saving the user a lot of time and allowing you to develop locally in your IDE and getting all the benefits that that offers without having to develop in a Databricks notebook, which is extremely restrictive. In the pipeline, we have a Kedro Databricks plugin, which is going to automate some of the steps in production and development workflows. That's in the pipeline. We're still planning what that will look like and what we're going to include there. That's somewhat further on the horizon, but it's also coming soon. You can expect this new documentation for Databricks to come out in the next 1 to 2 weeks. So that's the release of that is imminent. Publishing this new content, that's also a priority for us. That's going to happen on a variety of channels. Moving to the medium priority features that we want to add. Delta Lake support. We have, as Jette mentioned, we have a great set of people at our company working with Kedro on Databricks, and they've contributed a managed Delta table dataset to our Kedro datasets repo. So that's going to be available for general public consumption very soon. The PR is already open. We're very excited about it. It's going to be merged imminently. It's in the immediate future. Support managed ML flow on Databricks, very much in the pipeline as well. Yeah, and obviously we have features which have already been fixed. Really great to be able to use Kedro-Viz on Databricks already. And the other features obviously extremely useful also. And I think that's more or less it. What I'm going to do is put a link to the milestone for integrating Kedro properly with Databricks into the chat. You're going to be able to see all the tickets we have, all the PRs we create for this work are going to be tracked under this milestone, so you can check in on our progress. And obviously feel free to contribute, feel free to observe and comment with your suggestions on our development there. And that's all from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Yannick and Yetu. So we're going to close with Joe. He's going to tell us a few updates that have been happening on the website and other areas as well. So Joe, all yours.
Thank you. So I'm Joe. I'm a technical writer in the technical documentation team, in the Kedro team. And I am just going to give you a swift update on some of the changes that we've been making to the Kedro website. So the designers and website team have been hard at work helping us to rationalize some of the FAQs in the documentation and move them onto the website. Frequently asked questions are one of those really popular pages, but a lot of what we had in the documentation was more relevant to people that were finding out about Kedro for the first time and maybe couldn't find them in the docs. So we now have a very nice new section, which looks incredibly pretty, and it's got all the kind of questions that many people would be asking about Kedro. So if you haven't spotted that already and you've got questions, do drop over there and take a look. The other thing that we have recently added, which is incredibly exciting, is a blog. So up until recently, we were using Quantum Black's Medium channel to publish blog posts, and now we have our own home. And so this means that we can put content up more regularly, and we're able to collaborate with the community to write blog posts. So we will be putting up things like news, we'll be putting up a summary of this call, we'll be putting up tutorials, case studies, and I will be very keen to work with anyone in the community who wants to contribute blog posts, maybe talking about their experience or what they'd like to see in Kedro next. So do pop over to the blog, have a look, give us some feedback, particularly on what you'd like to see there, and ideally if you'd like to contribute. If you go to the top blog post that's featured, just in the first couple of paragraphs, there's some ways to get in touch with us, so it's easy to find and easy to reach out. So those are the features on the website. I'd just like to also give a big call out to the Getting Data team, who have been incredibly enthusiastic about working with Kedro recently. and they will be found on their GitHub repo. You can look at the plugins that they've recently contributed, and I'm sure you'll see some blog posts from them on here as well. So just wanted to call them out in particular. And that's it from me. Back to Juan Luis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is all from our side. I see that the chat has been mostly quiet with updates from our side, but it's now the moment for you to ask any question you might have to the team about what we saw so far or what's in the pipeline and anything else you might want to ask. So giving some space for folks to just unmute themselves and ask or drop it in the chat. In the meantime, I have an icebreaker question. So what can we expect about Python 3.11 support for Kedro and its plugins?
I mean,
Unmuted the wrong the wrong machine there. Yeah, 3.11. So we actually Nog, who's also on the call, has been looking into introducing 3.11 support on Kedro, and it will be coming. The thing we're waiting for at the moment is Spark updating and releasing their support for 3.11. The main reason being because we have some data sets that require Spark. And the way we want to do it now is basically we want to update our Kedro datasets first into the 3.11 support, and then add it to core Kedro as well. I think they are planning to release end of the month, so in about 3 weeks. And as soon as they have, we will be taking up the introduction of 3.11 support as well. So hopefully before the summer.
That's excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to read Ian's question out loud. So Ian says, in terms of environment management, are there plans to get Kedro-Viz onto CondaForge? Actually, I can talk a little bit about that. So there were some packaging issues that we were fighting with, but absolutely, I think it would be cool to have Kedro-Viz on CondaForge. There's an open pull request that I have, and there have been some fixes or rather things that I've learned how to do better since I started that effort. So probably we can push it over the line very soon. So yeah, thanks for asking. I don't know if anyone else from the team want to add on that. Kedro framework is already on CondaForge. Kedro-Viz, not yet.
Nothing to add from me.
Okay, any other question from the audience? All right, so if there is nothing else, I think we can leave it here. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thanks to the team for these wonderful updates. And see you all at the next Kedro community update. Bye, everyone.